The Galactic Council had tried everything: Andromedan war fleets, psionic warfare, weapons that could shatter planets. Nothing worked against the Bloodhound of Kepler-9. Then they discovered humanity's primary expertise listed on our application: comprehensive pest management. So they called Riley Murphy. You won't believe what she found. 27 species declared the same extinction-level threat within 6 standard months. You know how rare that is? The Glesians and the Xylos don't agree on breakfast, let alone interstellar emergencies. But the Bloodhound of Kepler-9 made it happen. This thing learned energy weapons that could punch through battle cruisers. Its hide adapted after the first volley. Planet-cracking missiles. It learned to sense the launch signatures and move. It wasn't just strong. It was a quick study. Witness accounts from refugee transports told the real story. It wasn't the size, though 50 meters tall tends to get your attention, or the 6 legs that could sprint across vacuum. It was the intelligence. The way it systematically took apart communication hubs first. The way it would disable power grids before attacking population centers. It hunted not for food, but for the game of it. It enjoyed the chase. The Galactic Council deployed the 7th Andromedan War Fleet. 300 dreadnoughts, psionic warfare specialists, resonance cannons that could destabilize a star. The fleet engaged near the Cygnus Veil. Battle records show the Bloodhound didn't just win. It learned their formation patterns. It bypassed their shields by literally copying their own tactical algorithms. The Admiral's last transmission was, "It's playing with us." Then silence. Settlements went dark across 12 systems. Not destroyed, just quiet. Like something had meticulously disassembled them. Power conduits neatly severed. Communication arrays disabled. Life support left running just to extend the fear. Military commanders saw chaos. They saw a monster with impossible technology. They saw a strategic genius. Fear does that. It makes you see a mastermind in every shadow. It makes you stupid. This wasn't a war. Wars have rules. Wars have fronts and flanks and negotiated surrenders. This was a hunt. The galaxy was the preserve. The Bloodhound was the only hunter. And it was winning. Every conventional solution failed. They tried trapping it in a gravity well. It learned to manipulate local spacetime and just stepped out. They tried luring it into a nebula filled with ionic disruptors. It used the nebula's own energy to cloak its approach and took out the disruptor array from behind. They even tried negotiating. The transmission they got back wasn't language. It was a recording of their own ambassador's terrified heartbeat, played back at 300 decibels. The Council's strategy room became a monument to desperation. Holograms of shattered fleets, maps of consumed colonies. They'd thrown technology that could reshape solar systems at this thing, and it had thrown it right back, but smarter. They were archaeologists, engineers, soldiers. They thought in terms of power, counterpower, escalation. They never considered the application, the one from the newest, least impressive species to ever petition for membership, the one they'd almost deleted unread. Humanity's application. Buried in the appendix under specializations and non-military expertise was a single line: comprehensive pest management, professional wildlife relocation, and a list of client testimonials from what appeared to be a series of increasingly baffled mayors on a backwater planet called Earth. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had the atmosphere of a funeral. Holograms of wrecked dreadnoughts spun slowly above the central table. Admirals from a dozen species sat slumped, their ceremonial armor seeming heavier than usual. They'd run out of ideas. They'd run out of weapons. They were just waiting. A junior aide, a nervous Threllian with too many eyes, cleared his throat. He'd been tasked with a final desperate measure, reviewing the applications from prospective member species. A formality, usually, a box to check. He'd found one from a planet called Earth. It was odd. Their listed military capabilities were a joke. Projectile weapons, primitive explosives. But under ancillary specializations, one line glowed: comprehensive pest management and wildlife relocation services. He read it aloud. The silence that followed wasn't thoughtful. It was offended. The Andromedan admiral sneered. Pest control. They handle insects, vermin. They list client testimonials, the aide said, his voice trembling, from municipal leaders. They cite successful resolutions of super colony arthropod infestations and urban megafauna habitation disputes. It was ridiculous. It was beneath them. But the Xylos diplomat, her frills twitching with exhaustion, pointed a slender finger at the hologram of a shredded battle group. We have tried everything that makes sense. Perhaps it is time to try something that does not. The summons went out on a subspace channel usually reserved for dignitaries. It reached Riley Murphy's personal comm unit in the middle of what was once Cleveland. She was knee-deep in a genetically modified rat's nest, her heavy-duty gloves slick with something. The message was a text-to-speech translation, the galactic equivalent of a robocall, informing her that her presence was formally requested by the Galactic Council to address a biodiversity concern. She showed up exactly as she was. No uniform, no ceremonial robes, just her stained work coveralls and steel-toed boots, scuffed from kicking open service hatches. She carried a large practical case. It didn't hold a weapon. It held sealable sample jars, a high-grade scent tracker, and a reinforced capture pole that looked like it was meant for alligators. The council chamber was a cathedral of light and data. Beings made of energy and beings with crystalline skin watched her walk across the polished floor. Her boots squeaked. The contrast was physical. On one side, holograms charting the destruction of star systems. On the other, a human woman placing her toolbox on the floor with a solid thump. The mockery was immediate, though polite. The Glesian ambassador gestured at the star charts. This entity has defeated our combined fleets. It learns, it adapts. And your proposed solution is pest control? Riley didn't look at the star charts. She was calibrating her scent tracker, her movements efficient, practiced. She didn't look up when she answered. Her voice was calm, flat, the voice of someone who tells you the price to remove the hornet's nest from your attic. You've got planet-killer bombs and warp-speed navies, she said, finally glancing up. Her eyes scanned the room not with awe but with a professional assessment. She was noting exits, ventilation shafts, potential nesting sites. You've thrown everything you have at it. And you lost. So now you're calling me. Maybe the problem isn't the size of your guns. Maybe you're just asking the wrong questions. The admirals bristled. The diplomats fell silent. She wasn't arrogant. She was certain. She wasn't there to fight a war. She was there to do a job. And in that moment, the galaxy's entire concept of power and expertise tilted on its axis, thrown off balance by the weight of a pair of dirty work boots. The council chamber smelled of ozone and anxiety. Holographic star maps flickered, showing fleet positions and casualty reports. Admirals argued over troop deployments and orbital bombardment strategies. And in the middle of it all, Riley Murphy ignored them. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her datapad displaying not battle plans but migration patterns and feeding cycles. While they planned their next grand assault, she was studying animal behavior. It was a complete disconnect. Two different languages being spoken in the same room. She rejected their entire premise within the first hour. You keep calling it a war, she said, not looking up from her screen. It's not. This isn't an enemy. It's an animal. A very large, very lost animal. The military commanders stared. To them, an opponent was something to be outmaneuvered, outgunned, overwhelmed. The concept of understanding it was a foreign, almost childish notion. Fear makes you stupid, she stated, her voice flat. It wasn't an insult. It was a professional observation. The same way a mechanic might say a cracked gasket causes a leak. You see chaos. You see a genius strategist because you can't believe something that big could just be following its instincts. You're looking for a grand plan. I'm looking for where it sleeps and what it likes to eat. She'd seen it before. A homeowner convinced a family of raccoons were master criminals, when really they just found a loose board and liked the taste of yesterday's pizza. Her expertise came from the streets of a reclaimed Earth, not star charts. She explained dealing with bioengineered rats that could chew through concrete and hyper-intelligent wasps that built hives in power substations. You don't fight them. You outsmart them. Every creature has a routine. A need for food, for water, for shelter. A pattern. You find the pattern, you find the solution. Size doesn't change that. A 50-meter predator still needs to eat. It still gets tired. It still has a favorite spot. The council members, beings from cultures built on warrior codes and ritual combat, struggled to process this. Their traditions valued honor, strength, direct confrontation. Riley's philosophy was the opposite. It valued patience, observation, and a kind of pragmatic empathy. You don't hate the pest. You just need it to be somewhere else. She placed her field cameras at the mouths of these caves, angling them to cover the approaches. She set them for motion activation during the crepuscular hours. Her entire toolkit fit in her pack. There were no soldiers with her, no backup. Just one woman, a scent tracker, and a growing sense of certainty. The galaxy's most advanced sensor arrays had failed because they were designed to find things that wanted to be found. Weapons give off energy. Engines give off heat. An animal just gives off scent and follows its habits. They were searching for a signature. She was following a trail. The pinging from her tracker grew steadier, stronger. The needle held firm. She stood at the entrance to the largest cave system, a yawning mouth in the rock large enough to fly a shuttle through. The air that flowed from it was cool and carried the potent, acrid smell she'd been tracking. It wasn't a faint trace anymore. It was the source. This was it, the lair, the place the creature returned to after every hunt, the place it felt safe. The answer hadn't been in a tactical readout or a fleet deployment chart. It was in the stories of scared refugees and the smell on the wind. The solution was so simple, so obvious, that the galaxy's collective fear had rendered it completely invisible. They'd been preparing for a siege. She'd just found the front door. The entrance to the cave wasn't a cave. It was a geological event. A hole in the planet large enough to swallow a small cruiser. The darkness inside wasn't an absence of light. It was a physical substance, thick and cold. Riley clicked on her headlamp. The beam cut a narrow cone into the black, illuminating walls that were scarred with deep, parallel grooves. The floor wasn't smooth rock. It was churned sediment, like a path worn by something unimaginably heavy passing through over and over again. This wasn't a hiding place. This was a highway. A commuter route for a 50-meter-tall passenger. She moved quietly, but not with the stealth of a soldier. She moved with the practiced caution of someone who doesn't want to startle a wasp nest. Her primary guide wasn't her eyes. It was the soft, insistent pinging from the scent tracker in her hand. The needle was pinned. The sulfur ozone smell was so strong here it coated the back of her throat. The air was cold and moved with a slow, deep current, pulling her further in. The signs were everywhere if you knew how to read them. The walls weren't just scratched. They were polished smooth in some places from constant contact. Loose rocks on the floor were crushed to powder. In the softer soil near side passages she found tracks, six-toed, massive. The impressions were fresh, the edges still sharp. The creature had passed through recently. The military's orbital sensors, tuned to the energy signatures of drives and reactors, saw this network as empty, geologically inert space, dead rock. They missed the entire story written on the walls and floor. At every major junction, she stopped. Not to set a trap. To set a camera. Small, rugged field units, the same kind she used to monitor raccoon dens back in Chicago. She mounted them high on stalactites, angling them down the main thoroughfares. She wasn't looking for a heat signature. She was building a pattern of movement. A schedule. How often did it pass through? Which tunnels did it use most? Did it move faster coming or going? This was the data the galaxy needed, not a weapons analysis, a behavioral study. The deeper she went, the more rhythmic the environment became. The tunnels weren't random. They followed the planet's aquifers. The creature hadn't carved these paths. It had found them. It was using the planet's own plumbing. The sound of dripping water grew louder, and with it the smell. That sharp electric odor intensified near every trickle of water, every still pool. It was marking its territory. It was leaving a signpost for itself. This was its home range. It wasn't hiding. It was living its life. She paused by a wide, slow-moving underground river. The water was clear and cold. Her light reflected off it. And there on the muddy bank was a perfect, fresh print. She knelt not in fear but in professional interest. She measured it with a laser rangefinder. She took a soil sample from the center of the print. The creature had stopped here. It had drunk from the river. This was a rest stop on its route. A predictable pause in a predictable routine. This was the final piece. The military had seen a ghost. An elusive, brilliant phantom that struck without warning. They'd searched for a commander's cunning and found nothing. Riley saw none of that. She saw an animal of immense power, yes, but also immense simplicity. Its intelligence wasn't strategic. It was adaptive. It learned how to open a door not to outsmart you, but because there might be food behind it. It avoided sensors not as a tactical maneuver, but because the buzzing annoyed it. Its seeming invincibility was just a combination of tough biology and good instincts. It wasn't a genius. It was just a creature that was very, very good at being what it was. The pinging from her tracker became a constant high-pitched tone. The signal was overwhelming. She was close. Very close. She rounded a bend in the tunnel, the beam of her headlamp stretching out into a vast cavernous space ahead. The air hummed with a low, deep vibration she could feel in her bones. A rhythmic sound. Like breathing. This was it. The end of the trail. Not the climax of a battle. The answer to a question. She didn't raise a weapon. She just took a step forward. Her boots silent on the stone, her expression one of focused, professional curiosity. The hunt was over. The identification was about to begin. The cavern opened up into a chamber so massive her headlamp beam couldn't find the ceiling. The air hummed, thick with that now familiar smell of ozone and wet dog. And there it was. The Bloodhound of Kepler-9. 50 meters of muscle and glistening dark fur, 6 powerful legs tucked under its body. Its eyes glowed with a soft, shifting light, like someone had trapped a nebula behind them. This was the thing that had shredded fleets and silenced worlds. It shifted its weight. The ground trembled. Riley stood perfectly still. She didn't raise her capture pole. She didn't even tense up. She just watched. The massive head, bigger than her entire truck back home, turned toward her. A low sound rumbled through the cavern, vibrating in her chest. It wasn't a roar. It was a whine. A curious, questioning whine. The creature leaned forward, its huge nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. And then behind it something moved. A long, powerful tail. It began to sweep back and forth across the stone floor in a slow, rhythmic, unmistakable motion. A wag, Riley's posture changed. The focused, professional stance of the tracker melted away. Her shoulders dropped. A slow smile spread across her face. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her voice when she spoke was soft. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a threat. It was the tone you use when you find your neighbor's lost Labrador wandering the street. "There's my boy," she said quietly. "Hey there, big guy. You're a long way from home, aren't you?" She took a slow step forward, her hand held out empty. The creature, Max, whined again, a sound of pure curiosity. He leaned down, his head descending toward her like a building lowering itself on an elevator. One of his eyes, a swirling galaxy of blue and white energy, was bigger than she was. He sniffed her outstretched hand. A blast of warm, metallic-scented air washed over her. Then a low rumbling noise started deep in his chest. A purr. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with such absurd simplicity it was almost laughable. The intelligence, the adaptability. It wasn't malice. It was play. He learned quickly because he was curious. He'd figured out how to bypass shields and disable sensors the same way a smart dog figures out how to open a latch on a gate. It was a game. A puzzle to be solved. The dreadnoughts he'd torn apart. They were shiny. They moved. They were the most interesting, complex chew toys a dog had ever seen. The reactor cores he consumed? They were warm and full of energy. The interdimensional equivalent of a really good high-protein snack. He wasn't a conqueror. He was a scavenger. A very, very large one. The galaxy's entire military had been defeated by a set of behaviors you could observe in any city park on a Saturday afternoon. The strategic genius they feared was just a dog's desire to explore and play. The extinction-level threat was a lost pet, scared and disoriented, trying to find its way in a universe that kept throwing scary, loud things at it. The sheer overwhelming horror of the Bloodhound of Kepler-9 evaporated in that damp cave, replaced by a wave of profound, cosmic absurdity. And warmth? He wasn't a monster. He was just a good boy. A very, very big good boy. Riley reached out and carefully placed her palm on the warm, dry fur of his enormous muzzle. He pushed against her hand, the pressure gentle for something his size, a clear request for more attention. She scratched behind what she guessed was his ear. The rumbling purr intensified. The problem had never been military. It wasn't about firepower or tactical genius. It was veterinary. It was about a creature in distress, one that needed help, not a firing squad. The entire galactic crisis narrowed down to a single, simple question. How do you get a 50-meter-tall interdimensional dog back to the vet? The story of how a dog from Earth became the most feared entity in the galaxy isn't one of evil genius. It's a story of a very, very bad day at the office. The program was cutting edge for its time. Early interdimensional travel. The theory was sound. The safety protocols, as it turned out, were not. Max wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a science experiment. He was a mascot. The lead researcher's dog. A friendly mutt who hung around the lab, probably getting underfoot and wondering when the next walk was coming. The accident wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a cascade failure. A containment field for an experimental growth serum flickered. At the exact same moment, a calibrated burst of cosmic radiation, meant to punch a tiny hole between dimensions, spiked. The two energy signatures intersected at the exact spot where Max was lying, chewing on an old boot. Physics did the rest. It wasn't malicious. It was just a perfect, terrible storm of bad luck. He didn't mutate with any grand purpose. He just grew. And he didn't stop. His biology rewrote itself on the fly. Normal dog metabolism can't support that much mass. So his cells adapted. They started craving pure energy. Reactor cores, power conduits, high-energy alloys. They weren't weapons to him. They were food. The shiniest, most calorie-dense kibble imaginable. His appetite wasn't about conquest. It was about basic survival. A body that big needs fuel. A lot of it. The intelligence the galaxy feared was just a dog's natural curiosity, amplified to an impossible degree. He learned, but not like a scholar. He learned like a very smart pet. He figured out that the glowing sensor arrays were annoying. They buzzed. They followed him. So he learned to move around them. To the military, this looked like advanced tactical evasion. To Max, it was a game. The biggest, most complex game of hide-and-seek ever played. The hunting patterns that sent strategists into a panic were just his daily routine, blown up to a planetary scale. He'd wake up at dawn, crepuscular hunter, remember, and go looking for breakfast. That meant hitting a mining outpost for some metallic ore. Then he'd explore, following interesting smells or sounds. That might lead him to a communications hub. Then by midday, he'd be tired. He'd find a quiet, dark place to nap. At dusk, he'd get up and do it all again. He wasn't laying siege. He was just living his life. A very, very large life. His seeming invincibility wasn't some magical shield technology. It was just a dog's natural resilience scaled up. A dog can fall down a flight of stairs and shake it off. Max could take a direct hit from a plasma cannon and, after a confused moment, just get back up. His body adapted to threats almost immediately, not through strategy, but through pure biological imperative. He wasn't a superweapon. He was just an incredibly tough animal. Riley saw it immediately. Standing there in that cave, she wasn't looking at a monster. She was doing a field assessment. His coat was glossy. His eyes were clear, if full of weird interdimensional energy. He was alert, engaged, and his tail was wagging. The big guy was healthy. A little disoriented, maybe. Lonely, probably. But fundamentally healthy. He wasn't a military problem. He was a veterinary case. A logistical nightmare of a veterinary case, but still. The crisis that had consumed the galactic military-industrial complex for months shifted in an instant. The goal was no longer extermination. The goal was care. The goal was getting this very lost, very large dog the help he needed, and hopefully, finding him a home where he wouldn't accidentally eat a spaceship. The question changed from how do we kill it, to what do you feed a 50-meter-tall interdimensional dog, and where do you take him for his shots? It was a much more interesting and far more human problem to solve. That was the easy part. Finding him. The real problem started now. Treating a 50-meter, six-legged dog suffering from chronic interdimensional radiation exposure and unstable growth isn't exactly covered in the standard field manual. There's no chapter on that. Riley's med scanner, a bulky yellow unit she normally used to check for rabies or parasitic infections, was giving her readouts that made no sense. His cells were saturated with exotic particles. His biology was literally flickering in and out of phase with local reality. He was a walking, breathing containment breach. Kepler-9 had a small med center for mining accidents. They could set a broken arm. They couldn't handle a patient whose molecular structure was slowly unraveling. She needed a specialist. Not a doctor. A retrieval expert. She pulled out her comm. The signal boosted to punch through the cavern rock and reach a very specific, very expensive private channel. Pete, yeah, it's me. A grumble came through the speaker. Pete dealt in lost cargo and the occasional misplaced experimental vehicle. His standard line was, emergencies only. Riley looked up at Max, who was currently trying to gently nuzzle a giant stalactite. I'd say this qualifies. I need an immediate evac, interdimensional class 4. Organic, very organic. And big, you're gonna need the big rig. And a detox team, the heavy-duty kind. The logistics were the thing that would give an admiral nightmares. This wasn't moving troops. This was moving a living creature the size of a skyscraper through a man-made portal without having him phase into a different dimension midway through. You needed calibrated stabilizer fields, a dedicated power source that could run a small city, a transport corridor wide enough and stable enough to handle the transit. The portal fees alone would be astronomical. This was a veterinary bill on a galactic scale. Her preliminary medical scans revealed the final crucial piece, the reason for all the destruction. Max's bioreadings showed elevated stress hormones, neurological patterns indicating severe disorientation and anxiety. He wasn't aggressive. He was scared. He was a lost dog in a universe he didn't understand, surrounded by loud, shiny things that hurt his ears. He wasn't attacking. He was flailing. He was trying to find his way home and biting anything that got in his way. The solution wasn't a missile. It was a sedative and a warm blanket. The resolution was a flurry of calls and requisitions. She arranged for a specialized detox tank on a stable, uninhabited world, a facility usually used for decontaminating radioactive starship components. She booked a secure, oversized habitat, a nature preserve built for a species of giant, gentle herbivores. It had space. It had natural resources he could safely consume. It had peace and quiet. The itemized list started to take shape. Dimensional stabilization field rental, portal transit fees for extra-large biological cargo, long-term cosmic radiation cleansing, interspecies veterinary consultation, secure habitat leasing. The line items sounded like science fiction, but they were just the practical, boring steps needed to fix a very big problem. The Galactic Fleet's answer had been to break things. Riley's answer was to book an appointment and arrange transport. The solution was never going to be found in a weapons locker. It was in a logistics spreadsheet and a medical chart. The admirals had been preparing a funeral. Riley was organizing a spa day and a moving van. The galaxy's budgetary committee, a group accustomed to approving trillions for new warship construction, was about to get an invoice that included a line item for interdimensional flea prevention. They were not ready. The council chamber felt different this time. The holograms of ruined dreadnoughts were gone. The air, usually thick with military tension, was now just stale. Riley walked back into the room, still in her work clothes. She didn't carry a trophy. She didn't present a captured banner. She held a datapad. On it was a single document, an invoice. She stood in the same spot she had days before, surrounded by the same admirals and diplomats. Their expressions were different now. Less arrogance, more confusion. They expected a victory speech, the story of a glorious final battle. Riley gave them a diagnosis. The entity you designated the Bloodhound is a non-native terrestrial mammal, she began, her voice flat, professional. Designation Canis lupus familiaris. It's a dog, a lost pet. It's suffering from severe interdimensional radiation exposure and requires immediate specialized care. The silence was brittle. You could hear the hum of the holographic projectors. The Andromedan admiral, his carapace clicking with agitation, was the first to break it. A pet? He repeated, the word sounding alien and ridiculous in his translator box voice. It destroyed the 7th Fleet. It consumed 3 colony worlds. You're saying it's a stray? Riley didn't flinch. I'm saying you've been trying to declare war on a sick animal. You don't fight a sick animal. You treat it, or you relocate it. She tapped her datapad. A hologram shimmered into existence above it. Not a battle map, a bill, a long itemized list. The total for interdimensional retrieval, stabilization, transportation, and full-spectrum radiation detox comes to 37 billion credits, payable to Murphy's Interstellar Pest Management upon completion of services. The number landed in the room like a physical object. 37 billion. It was a staggering sum. For a moment, nobody spoke. They just stared at the digits hanging in the air. Then the protest began. The outrage. The sheer unbelievable gall of it. They had spent trillions of credits on fleet construction, on munitions, on failed campaign after failed campaign. They had lost ships worth hundreds of billions each. And this woman, this exterminator, was presenting them with a solution that cost less than a single mid-tier cruiser. Riley waited for the noise to die down. Her argument was simple. Devastatingly simple. You can pay me 37 billion to solve the problem, she said, her gaze sweeping the room. or you can go back to spending trillions not solving it. Your call. She wasn't selling them a weapon. She was selling them efficiency. She was offering to fix the leak instead of handing them a bigger bucket. The logic was a cold, hard slap. The military commanders saw the ghost of every dreadnought they'd lost in that number. The diplomats saw the political salvage operation. Instead of having to explain a costly, bloody victory, they could announce a compassionate, intelligent resolution. They could pivot from "we defeated the monster" to "we helped a lost creature in need." The public relations value alone was incalculable. The vote was quiet. The formality. The payment was approved. The transfer was authorized. Just like that. The Galactic Council, the pinnacle of political and military power for 1,000 light years, had just hired a pest control service to handle their biggest crisis. Riley nodded, made a note on her datapad, and turned to leave. The invoice, that simple list of services and fees, remained projected in the center of the room. It wasn't a battle standard. It was a receipt. A symbol of a paradigm shift so profound it would take decades for the galaxy to fully understand it. The message was clear. Sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the most powerful one. It's the one that actually works. And sometimes it comes with a money-back guarantee. Pest control had just saved the galaxy, and it had done it on a budget. The number floated in the council chamber. 37 billion credits. For pest control, you could buy a moon for that. You could fund a small war. The line items were a work of art. Interdimensional biostabilization field rental. High-yield portal transit for extra-large organic cargo. Long-term cosmic radiation detoxification therapy. Secure oversized habitat leasing. It read like a shopping list for a god. But it was just a receipt. The bill for fixing the galaxy's biggest problem. The military wing of the council practically had a collective stroke. Admirals from a dozen species sputtered. Their entire careers were built on the principle that bigger guns and bigger budgets solved everything. They'd just been presented with a solution that cost less than the catering for their last war games. It was an insult to their entire doctrine. They saw a bill. They saw an invoice from a glorified exterminator. Their pride was hemorrhaging. The diplomats saw it differently. They saw the math. Trillions spent on fleet construction, billions more on munitions, the economic cost of lost colonies, disrupted trade routes, the sheer panic that had frozen entire sectors. 37 billion wasn't an expense. It was a rounding error. It was the bargain of the millennium. They saw the political victory. They wouldn't have to stand before the galactic media and explain another 1,000 lost lives in a glorious but Pyrrhic battle. They could announce a compassionate, intelligent resolution, a story of cross-species empathy and clever problem-solving. The PR value was immeasurable. Riley sold it without ever raising her voice. She wasn't a politician. She was a professional explaining a job. "You were treating the symptoms," she said, her tone as flat as a technician explaining a repair. "The roaring, the destruction. I treated the cause. The interdimensional radiation sickness, the disorientation, the hunger." She'd provided a diagnosis and a cure. She hadn't delivered a victory. She'd delivered a completed service. The galaxy was so used to escalating force that a simple final solution felt like a magic trick. They paid. Of course they paid. The transfer of funds was authorized before the meeting even officially adjourned. The credit chit was a formality. The real payment was the acknowledgement. The Galactic Council, in a single transaction, formally recognized Earth's bizarre, niche expertise. They weren't admitting a new military power. They were hiring a specialist contractor. The message shot across the subspace networks faster than any battle report. The Bloodhound was neutralized. Not by a fleet. By an invoice. The story wasn't about firepower. It was about perspective. The simplest solution is often the most advanced, because it's the one that actually identifies the root of the problem, instead of just reacting to the noise. Pest control, a profession mostly concerned with rats and termites, was suddenly officially a galactic defense strategy. Universities on 100 worlds started adding courses on non-military conflict resolution, with Max's case as the primary textbook example. His care became a flagship program for interspecies empathy. Here was this colossal being, capable of unimaginable destruction, and the solution wasn't to destroy him back. It was to understand him, to heal him, to give him a safe place to live. It was a more powerful lesson than any treaty. It proved that even the most terrifying problems could have peaceful, even kind resolutions if you were willing to look past the fear. The invoice itself became a cultural artifact. Copies of it were displayed in museums. It was analyzed by economists, historians, philosophers. It was a single page of itemized services that had done what entire armadas could not. It represented a colossal shift in thinking. The galaxy, in its relentless pursuit of greater and greater power, had missed a fundamental truth. Sometimes the most powerful tool isn't a missile that can crack a planet. It's a well-written bill for services rendered. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows how to fix things, and the humility to pay them to do it. The Bloodhound of Kepler-9 didn't teach the galaxy how to fight better. It taught them how to think smarter, and it only cost 37 billion credits. A steal. The Galactic Council's emergency response protocols got a new annex. It wasn't about fleet deployment or weapons authorization. It was titled, Department of Pest Management and Wildlife Relocation, Standard Operating Procedures. Earth officially had a seat at the table, not as a military power, not as a technological leader. As a specialist consultant, the application form for membership now included a section on non-combat specializations, and pest management was right there next to diplomacy and xenoarchaeology. The universe had officially gotten weirder, and a lot more practical. Admirals from the old guard hated it. They fought the changes in committee meetings. They argued that their warrior traditions and honor codes were being undermined by exterminators. But their arguments were getting harder to make. They'd spent trillions and failed. Riley's department had spent a fraction of that and succeeded. The facts were stubborn things. You could respect tradition, but you couldn't argue with a completed job and a full refund policy. Results speak. They speak in the quiet hum of a stable sector and the absence of panicked distress calls. So Riley's methods became doctrine. The first step in any new crisis wasn't to scramble the fleet. It was to send in an assessment team with field cameras and scent trackers. Pattern recognition over force, observation over assault. The new manuals included chapters on identifying crepuscular activity cycles and subterranean nesting behaviors. Soldiers were retrained to look for disturbances in soil and changes in atmospheric composition. Not just energy signatures. It was a complete overhaul of galactic defense strategy, and it all boiled down to thinking like a really good park ranger. Universities across known space started offering advanced degrees in interspecies pest management. It became a respected, sought-after expertise. A whole generation of young beings who might have dreamed of being starfighter pilots were now dreaming of analyzing droppings and setting humane traps. The career path had shifted. The most brilliant tactical mind might end up working for a municipal wildlife service, and that was now considered a vital public good. Funds set aside for habitat rehabilitation and relocation services. The accountants had to create entirely new fiscal categories. The cost of caring for a creature was now a standard acceptable line in a defense budget. The universe had officially decided that sometimes the best defense was a good vet. The whole affair left the galaxy a different place. A little less arrogant, a little more humble, and significantly funnier. The image of the mighty Galactic Council being saved not by a warrior, but by a woman with a capture pole and an itemized bill, never really faded. It became a reminder, a check on their ego. The universe is a strange, complicated place. Sometimes the biggest, scariest problem isn't a declaration of war. It's just a very large animal in the wrong neighborhood. And sometimes the hero you need isn't the one with the biggest gun. It's the one who knows how to read the signs, who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty, and who isn't shy about sending the bill. The galaxy had braced for a nightmare from beyond the stars. What they got was a very, very big dog. A creature of staggering power and cosmic energy, sure. But strip all that away, and the core behaviors were the most familiar thing in the universe. The wagging tail that could level a small building. The curious head tilt that shifted tons of muscle. The low, rumbling whine that was just a request for attention. He wasn't an alien intelligence. He was a good boy. A universal constant, it turns out, isn't a law of physics. It's a dog's desire for a scratch behind the ears. The dread and terror that had gripped 1,000 worlds evaporated the moment that tail started sweeping across the cavern floor. The galaxy had prepared for a monster. It found a friend who ate dreadnoughts instead of shoes, but the principle was the same. The fear had been a blanket, smothering their ability to see what was right in front of them. The moment Riley spoke to him using that soft, calm tone, the illusion shattered. The bond that formed between the woman in the work boots and the interdimensional giant wasn't about technology or diplomacy. It was something simpler. It was recognition. One creature recognizing another, past the size and the glow and the cosmic radiation. It was the same connection that happens in a shelter back on Earth every single day. It just happened to be on a slightly larger scale. The crisis that had consumed fleets and toppled governments ended not with a final cataclysmic battle, but with a quiet moment of understanding. It ended with a diagnosis, not a death toll. The resolution was empathy, packaged as professional pest control. The most powerful weapon deployed wasn't a planet cracker. It was a steady hand and a calm voice. The entire conflict was built on a single massive misunderstanding. They thought they were fighting a war. They were just dealing with a lost pet. The scale of the destruction was astronomical. The cause was laughably small. Dogs, it turns out, are the same everywhere. Their capacity for loyalty, their boundless curiosity, their simple, straightforward needs. They don't change. Only the scope of the trouble they can get into does. A terrier digs up a flower bed. A 50-meter interdimensional hound digs up a platinum mine. The principle is identical. It's not malice. It's just what they do. The universe learned that the difference between a nuisance and an extinction-level event is often just a matter of cubic meters. The story spread, of course. It became a legend. Not the legend of a great warrior or a brilliant scientist, but the legend of the bug lady and her dog. The day a pest controller from a backwater planet saved the cosmos with a scent tracker and a whole lot of common sense. Humanity's true export to the galaxy wasn't our weapons or our engines. It was our perspective, our stubborn, pragmatic, occasionally frustrating insistence on looking for the simple, stupid, obvious answer everyone else is too complicated to see. It was our heart, our ability to look at a monster and ask, yeah, but what if he's just scared? The galaxy, for all its ancient wisdom and advanced technology, had been humbled by a fundamental lesson. The biggest, most terrifying problems often have the smallest, simplest roots. A scientific accident, a lost animal, a series of choices driven by fear instead of curiosity. And if the roots are simple, the solutions can be simple too. You don't need a bigger gun. You need a better question. You need to look past the roaring and the destruction and ask the basic thing. What does it want? Where does it hurt? The answer to the Bloodhound of Kepler-9 wasn't in an armory. It was in any basic guide to animal behavior. The simplest solution is usually the right one. You just have to be brave enough, or maybe just practical enough, to try it first. Riley Murphy went back to Earth, back to the reclaimed streets of Cleveland, the mutant rat infestations, the clogged sewer lines. She hung up her coveralls, put the reinforced capture pole back in the van. On the surface, nothing changed. But her shadow got a lot longer. It stretched across star systems. Her communicator, the one that used to get calls from the city sanitation department, now occasionally pinged with Priority 1 encrypted alerts from the Galactic Council. The subject line was always some variation of biodiversity concern. They never called it a war anymore. You still heard the jokes, of course. The old guard military types, the ones who'd lost face and funding, they'd mutter about the bug lady and officers' clubs. They'd sneer at the idea of a professional heroism that involved more paperwork than plasma fire. But the joke was on them. A framed copy of her invoice for 37 billion credits hung in the main council chamber on the Capital World. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder, a lesson in brutal, beautiful efficiency. It was proof that you could solve the biggest problem in the galaxy without a single shot being fired. If you were smart enough to see the problem for what it really was, she proved that heroism isn't about who has the most power. It's about who has the right perspective. It's about looking at a 50-meter-tall interdimensional engine of destruction and seeing a lost, scared animal that needs help finding its way home. That shift in view changed everything. It was more disruptive than any new weapon. It was a quiet revolution in thinking. Max got his happy ending. The detox worked. The stabilized dimension they found for him was perfect. A whole lush, quiet world with deep canyons to explore and mineral-rich mountains that were a lot more satisfying to chew on than dreadnought hull plating. He's healthy. He's happy. And through a carefully calibrated, very expensive portal link, he gets the occasional visitor. Riley goes out there sometimes. Takes a few days off. You can see her from orbit sometimes, a tiny speck sitting on a cliff edge, next to an enormous, gently snoring head. He still wags his tail when he sees her. It causes minor seismic events. It's a good system. The galaxy's emergency call list got a new number. When the impossible happens, when the fleets fail and the diplomats panic, they don't ask for more admirals. They put in a call to Earth. They ask for a consultant. The problems are weird now. A crystalline entity that's disassembling communication satellites to build a giant nest. A gas-based life form that's mistaken a fusion reactor for a mating display. The kind of things you can't solve with a missile. The kind of things you solve with a good field guide and a lot of patience. Riley's philosophy is the new first response protocol. See the animal, not the myth. Understand the need, not just the threat. It's a simple idea. Deceptively simple. But it saved the galaxy. Her real legacy isn't a statue. It's a universe that's learned to take a closer look before it opens fire. A universe that's a little quicker to ask why, and a little slower to reach for the biggest gun. It's a quieter, smarter, slightly funnier place, and it all started with a bill. A 37 billion credit invoice for pest control services rendered. A piece of paper that did what entire armadas couldn't. It didn't just close a case. It opened a new chapter. One where the heroes wear work boots and carry clipboards. And the most powerful weapon in the universe is sometimes just the right question, asked at the right time by someone who isn't afraid to get a little dirt on their hands. The galaxy learned that the final solution isn't always an explosion. Sometimes it's just a completed job. And a receipt the image is hard to shake. 27 species. Trillions of credits. The combined military might of the Galactic Council. All of it defeated not by a superweapon but by a dog's simple desire for a good chew toy. The dreadnoughts he shredded weren't enemies. They were just the shiniest, most interesting things he'd ever found. A reactor core isn't a power source to a dog. It's a warm, energy-dense bone. The scale of the destruction was cosmic. The motivation was backyard simple. It's the kind of absurdity that gives accountants a permanent twitch. The number, that 37 billion credit invoice, became a running joke in financial districts across the galaxy. You'd hear it in the halls of power. An admiral would request funding for a new class of ultra-destroyer, and some junior diplomat would quietly mutter, "Or we could just hire the bug lady again. Probably get a bulk discount." The sting to military pride was real, and it lingered. Commanders who'd dedicated their lives to the art of war now had to sit through seminars on crepuscular activity cycles and proper scent-marking analysis. Their honor was built on glorious battle. Their new reality involved reading reports on territorial behaviors of large fauna. The adjustment was uncomfortable, but you can't argue with the results. The star systems once paralyzed by fear are quiet. Trade routes are open. The panic is gone. Replaced by a story. A really, really good story. The kind that gets told in spaceport bars for centuries. The story of the day the galaxy's bravest warriors were upstaged by a woman with a sharp nose and a sharper invoice. The facts are stubborn. Peace is better than war. Stability is better than chaos. And a completed job is better than a glorious failure. The galaxy, in its infinite complexity, is learning to laugh at itself. The Council's emergency sessions have a different tone now. The holograms of doom are still there, but the tension is thinner. Someone will make a comment about a new biodiversity concern, and there will be a pause, a glance around the room, and then often a laugh. Not a cruel laugh, a relieved laugh. The laugh of a group that has finally learned that the universe is weird, and that's okay. That the biggest problems sometimes have the smallest, silliest solutions. You can either rage against the absurdity, or you can learn to enjoy the show. Max is living his best life. His new habitat is perfect. Fast canyons to run in. Soft, energy-rich mineral deposits that are much better for his teeth than Durasteel hull plating. His favorite toys, the ones his human friends occasionally send through the stabilized portal, are still pieces of scrap metal. Shredded hull plates, twisted engine parts. He'll spend hours batting them around, chasing them across the valleys. They're not symbols of his past destruction. They're just his toys. A simple pleasure for a simple soul. Riley back on Earth handles the odd interdimensional call. Her business expanded. She had to hire a dedicated comms officer. She jokes that her premium service isn't for the rats or the wasps. It's for the cosmic-sized problems. The ones that come with a travel waiver and a very specific insurance rider. Her dry humor is now a fixture in the council chambers. They've learned to appreciate it. It cuts through the tension. It reminds them not to take themselves so seriously. The universe is a safer place. Not because we built bigger guns, but because someone one day looked at the most terrifying threat anyone had ever seen and asked the stupidest, most obvious question imaginable. What if it's just a pet? That question changed everything. It proved that the most advanced form of intelligence isn't about processing power. It's about perspective. It's about seeing the world not as a battlefield, but as a very large, very complicated neighborhood. And sometimes the neighbor is just a dog, a very, very big dog, and all he needs is a little help finding his way home. In the end, the galaxy's greatest terror was just a lost dog. The Bloodhound of Kepler-9 wasn't a monster. It was a very good boy who'd had a very bad day. Humanity's real power wasn't in weapons or warships. It was a way of seeing, a stubborn insistence on asking the simple question everyone else thought was foolish. A little bit of heart and a lot of common sense. Sometimes the solution isn't a bigger gun, it's a calmer voice, a little more patience, a little more understanding. Sometimes all you need is a different point of view. Her tools were a quiet insult to their advanced technology. While they had sensor arrays that could scan a planet's core, she requested access to civilian traffic monitors and atmospheric composition reports. She wasn't looking for energy signatures. She was looking for disturbances, for patterns of missing resources, for strange droppings or unusual soil displacement. She set up motion-activated trail cameras at the periphery of attack sites. Her primary instrument was a scent tracker, tuned to analyze molecular residues, and she found it. What the Admiral saw as tactical genius, she saw as predictable habit. The attacks weren't random. The Bloodhound always hit mining outposts and refueling depots first. It was going for the raw materials, the high-energy compounds. Then it would target communication hubs, not as a strategic move to cause panic, but to eliminate the annoying constant noise, the electromagnetic chatter that probably gave it a headache. It was following a simple, logical sequence. Eat, then secure a quiet place to digest. The resolution was dawning, and it was making the military commanders deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't about outthinking a peer. It wasn't a battle of wits. It was about anticipating the next move of a creature driven by basic, biological needs. The galaxy's entire military-industrial complex, its culture of glorious battle, was about to get a lesson from a pest control agent with a good nose and a lot of patience. They had prepared for a duel. She was preparing for a tracking job, and the galaxy, for all its wisdom, was completely unprepared for that. The dropship doors hissed open on a silence so complete it felt like a physical weight. Kepler-9 wasn't a war zone. It was a charnel house with the bodies removed. The air itself was wrong. Military scans had noted a slightly elevated sulfur and ozone content, dismissed as residual from weapons fire. Riley took one deep breath through her nose the way a chef tastes a sauce. Her eyes narrowed. That smell. It wasn't random. It was specific. It was the creature's scent trail, baked into the very atmosphere by its passage. Everyone else had been looking for radiation spikes and energy signatures. She was following her nose. The outpost was a skeleton picked clean, not by bombs. It was too precise for that. Conduits had been neatly severed. Power cores were gone, ripped from their housings. Storage lockers were hollowed out. Their contents, metals, polymers, organic compounds, all consumed. It was like watching a time-lapse of a carcass being reduced to bones by scavengers, just sped up to a terrifying degree. This wasn't destruction. This was consumption on an industrial scale. She found the main lab's data core miraculously intact. The scientists' logs told a story the military summaries had completely missed. The first entry was almost cheerful. Day 1. Large, unidentified fauna spotted near the southern mineral vein. Incredible biosignature. Preparing a non-invasive scan. The tone was one of excitement. A new discovery. Day 3. Subject demonstrates alarming sensory acuity. Actively avoids all scanner beams. Adjusting frequency. The excitement was gone, replaced by professional puzzlement. Day 7. It learned the guard rotation schedule. It waited for the shift change. It took Jenkins. We are sealing the inner bulkheads. The final entry was just audio. Heavy rhythmic breathing from the vents. Then a sound like a giant metal can being crumpled. Then silence. The military saw a monster that learned tactics. Riley saw an animal that learned cause and effect. It wasn't strategizing. It was figuring things out. A rat learns to avoid a trap after seeing another rat get caught. This was the same principle, just scaled up to a cosmic level. Its adaptability wasn't a weapon. It was a survival trait. It consumed everything not out of malice, but because its biology demanded a constant, massive intake of energy and raw materials. It was a furnace that never went out. She found the survivors huddled in a reinforced storage bay. They weren't soldiers. They were geologists, chemists, technicians. Their stories were fragmented, told in whispers, eyes wide with a terror that hadn't faded. They didn't talk about battle formations. They talked about the sounds, the heavy, rhythmic thumping of its footsteps that shook the ground, the low whine it made like a power tool straining under a heavy load, and they all mentioned the timing. It always came at dawn, or right at dusk, every single time. The military's sensor sweeps, designed to detect fleet movements and energy weapons, had completely filtered this out. A crepuscular pattern, active at twilight. It was basic wildlife biology, a fact you'd find on the first page of any field guide back on Earth. A predator that hunts when the light is low. The entire galactic fleet had been defeated by a simple, predictable behavioral rhythm. Riley stood amidst the ruins, the scent of ozone and sulfur sharp in her nostrils, the survivors' accounts lining up in her mind. The chaos the Admiral saw resolved into a clear, simple picture. This wasn't a brilliant enemy commander. This was an animal with a set of ingrained routines. It needed to eat high-energy materials. It preferred to hunt in low light. It had a home range it patrolled. It left a distinct smell. It was, for all its impossible size and power, incredibly predictable. The hunt could finally begin. But not with soldiers and guns. She unpacked her case. Not a single weapon came out. Instead, she set up motion-activated trail cameras at the periphery of the ruined base, pointed toward the mineral-rich canyons the initial log had mentioned. She took air samples, calibrating her tracker to the specific sulfur-ozone mix. This wasn't a military operation anymore. It was a stakeout. Riley found them in a temporary settlement on Kepler-9's lone moon, a cluster of makeshift domes that smelled of recycled air and shared fear. The Catharians. They were a species of slender, avian-like beings, all quick movements and nervous energy. They'd lost their entire colony to the creature. Their stories weren't military briefings. They were first-hand accounts, raw and unfiltered, and they were a mess of overlapping voices and traumatic details. The military's professional debriefers had listened to these same stories and filed them under civilian panic. They'd heard noise. Riley listened for signal. Their accounts were frantic, emotional. They spoke of the thunderous approach, the shriek of tearing metal, the terror of being hunted. But beneath the panic, Riley's ear, trained on 1,000 complaints about raccoons in the attic and squirrels in the walls, caught the rhythm. The consistency. The attack always came in the low light of dawn, just as the primary star was cresting the horizon. Or it hit at dusk as the long shadows stretched across the canyons, every single time. The retreats followed the same clockwork. The Catharians called it the Twilight Terror. Military analysts, with their focus on fleet movements and power signatures, had dismissed this as irrelevant atmospheric data. They'd given it a fancy, useless name, a crepuscular hunting pattern. It sounded impressive. It meant nothing to them. To Riley, it meant everything. It was the key. A crepuscular predator, active at dawn and dusk. She'd dealt with dozens of species back on Earth that followed the exact same schedule. It wasn't a strategy. It was biology. Hardwired instinct. The creature wasn't choosing the best tactical moment. It was hunting when it felt most comfortable, when its senses gave it the greatest advantage. This simple, obvious fact had been completely invisible to everyone who saw it as a warship instead of an animal. She spread a topographical map of Kepler-9 across a low table. The Catharians gathered around, their long fingers tracing the river valleys and mountain ranges of their lost home. As they talked, pointing out attack sites, Riley didn't just mark locations. She connected them, and the connections all led back to the same feature, the planet's vast network of underground rivers and aquifers. The creature wasn't moving across the surface like a tank. It was using these subterranean waterways like highways. They provided shelter from the harsh midday sun, a constant water source, and a hidden transit system. It would emerge from a cave mouth at dawn, hunt and retreat back underground by full daylight. The military's orbital scans, looking for heat plumes from engines or energy shields, had seen nothing but cool, empty caves. They were looking for technology. Riley was looking for habitat. She followed the trail on foot now, her modified scent tracker held before her like a dowsing rod. It was tuned to that specific lingering mix of sulfur and ozone she'd first smelled at the ruined outpost. The device was simple. No fancy displays. Just a needle that twitched and a speaker that emitted a soft, rising ping as the concentration of the signature molecules increased. To the galactic corps of engineers, it would have looked like a child's toy. To Riley, it was a bloodhound on a leash. It led her away from the scarred battlefields, away from the places the fleets had been looking. It led her toward the foothills, toward a series of large, dark cave openings that smelled of damp rock and that unmistakable, sharp odor.